Are nobody's hands clean? That's what former President Barack Obama had to say about Israel-Palestine, and he urged Americans to, quote, take in the whole truth when discussing what's going on with Israel and Hamas. Let's watch.
If there's any chance of us being able to act constructively to do something, it will require an admission of complexity and maintaining what on the surface may seem contradictory ideas. That what Hamas did was horrific and there's no justification for it. And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. And what is also true is that there is a history of the Jewish people that may be dismissed unless your grandparents or your great-grandparents or your uncle or your aunt tell you stories about the madness of anti-Semitism. And what is true is that there are people right now who are dying who have nothing to do with what Hamas did. You have to take in the whole truth. And you then have to admit nobody's hands are clean.
So I don't know, do you have a problem with that statement? I thought it was perfectly, I think I agree with it.
Yeah, so the reason that there was so much objection to this statement is that here we have another president of the United States, former president of the United States, who was president for 8 years and who isn't just one of us sitting on the sidelines opining about the philosophy of what's going on in the Middle East.
Well, he
had an opportunity to actually enact policy. So when he's saying nobody's hands are clean, there is a collapsing of the kind of responsibility that someone like Barack Obama has as someone who administered over.
Well, he's using the royal us.
Right, but he shouldn't, because that's unfair and it collapses his own personal responsibility for sending $23.6 billion of aid to Israel while exactly these kinds of behaviors were ongoing. At the time, this has been an ongoing occupation and routine bombing, mowing of the lawn of the people of Gaza and pogroms against people in the West Bank as well. Not to mention signing off on $38 billion of aid before he went out of office. So for him to sit there and say, well, you know, this is a very complex issue, that's another concern that people have, that historically part of the messaging around this is that it's too complex for you to have an opinion. Leave it to the experts. And what is happening right now, I think, is folks are rejecting that fundamental premise and instead following their gut reaction to the barbarity of the images that they're seeing coming out of Gaza right now. The complexity argument says, don't trust your eyes, trust the fact that there's some academic somewhere who's written some book that's going to explain to you why this brutal murdering of over 10,000 innocent Palestinians is absolutely necessary, why the thousands and thousands of kids that have been killed absolutely had to have been killed. And so I think that's part of why this reaction has been so negative.
It's complex because Israel civilians were attacked by a terrorist group that then retreats into this heavily impoverished civilian area and hides among them, including in tunnel networks under hospitals and other places. And the government of Israel wants to root them out because they were attacked by them. And they are now killing a whole lot of civilians in that process, which we rightly reject and say is horrible. And I think have every reason to question whether we ought to help pay for that destruction as we have done. And I agree with you on the funding question. Barack Obama and every president prior to him since World War II helped give Israel more money than any other government on the face of the earth. I'm not sure why they need that funding. I think they can pay for their own defense. I think other players in the Middle East, in the Islamic world, look at the U.S. very negatively because of that. And we should have an America first foreign policy that puts our security at the U.S. government should be focused on U.S. security, and many American taxpayers don't want to give this money overseas anyway and question why this is making us safer. But all that said, I don't think it's fair to reject the underlying complexity of the issue, given that it's two groups that have conflicting aims and a dispute over territory, and the Israeli government has done a lot of horrible things, we've talked about how it actually has propped up, has led to Hamas being more active, but also then the Palestinian territory, the Gaza Strip, is controlled by Hamas, which is a terrorist group, which the state of Israel rejects as legitimate and is carrying out attacks on them. So it is complicated.
I don't know. I see thousands of kids getting killed and say there should be a ceasing of that. I support a ceasefire. I think that's a kind of simplicity that a lot of people are engaged with, and being told, no, there can't be a ceasefire for complex reasons that you don't understand.
There can't be, there can be a ceasefire. The state of Israel doesn't want a ceasefire, and Hamas wants to continue war with the state of Israel when it is prepared to do so again.
Well, in the United States
let's not be naive and say, well, it'll be all kumbaya and perfect forever if Israel stops trying to destroy Hamas.
No, it certainly won't be, because the people of Palestine are still going to be living under occupation.
And the people of Israel will be still subjected to terrorist attacks by Hamas.
Right.
So that's why there will be no ceasefire. That's why they're going to keep attacking until Hamas is destroyed.
Why is Hamas attacking Israel?
Because they are dedicated to its overthrow and want to extend their dictatorial government, because they're a terrorist organization. That's their aim. I don't know why. I wish it wasn't the case, but it is the case.
Robby, Hamas it was an election that was a long time ago that very few people in Palestine participated in because of their age and the distance of time that's passed. But it is the elected government of Gaza. It is also the government that Bibi Netanyahu hoped and Pied Pipered into office precisely so it could have the objective that Israel has been pretty clear about, and so many of its state officials have articulated in the last month, which is to raise Gaza to the ground, to flatten it.
I don't know what you're saying. If you're saying it's the legitimate government of Gaza, then that gives more moral and philosophical weight to Israel's war with the entire territory.
Does it? Is it?
I'm rejecting that they're a legitimate government because nobody, as you said, half of the people haven't voted on them, and they haven't held any more elections.
So Osama bin Laden says the people in the World Trade Centers were legitimate targets because the people of the United States of America, and much bigger numbers than the folks in Gaza, voted for George Bush to be president, and voted for every other president whose foreign policy
Right. I don't think we should not be held responsible for the foreign policy of the Bush administration, nor should the people of Gaza be held responsible for what Hamas is doing. And Hamas is not a legitimate
Right. But so here's the situation, though, Robby. The situation is that even though we can sit here and agree that the people of Gaza shouldn't be held responsible for Hamas, that's exactly what Israel is doing. And we know that because it has killed 10,000 people. There are dozens of families that are completely been wiped from the registrar, meaning they killed every member of that family, hundreds of people. It takes for that to happen. There has been over a dozen journalists that have been killed. Some argue targeted, but definitely killed.
This is the result of Hamas's actions, which provoked Israel on the state of October 7th. This is on them. It's on them.
All right. Well, it's being funded by the United States, and it's being politically.
And we could stop funding it tomorrow. That's fine.
Robby, come on. I'm going to say a couple of things in a row here, okay? It's being funded by the United States. It's being politically protected by the United States. There is messaging out of the State Department that says the United States only wants cover to not be damned politically for its support of Israel. It is not applying any pressure on Israel to actually prevent the war crimes that Israel is enacting right now. There has been over a dozen.
Just not listening.
No, their pressure is to make it less messy, not to stop the onslaught. There's a difference.
They want pauses so that supplies can come in.
They want to be able to look back. I can find the exact quote if you give me a second. They want to be able to look back and reference statements of that suggest the United States offered caution and to moderate the approach, so that when the dust clears and the numbers of dead are fully counted. To be clear, we're saying 10,000. The Palestinian Authority is saying 10,000. The IDF, Israel, put out a statement saying that bragging that 20,000 had been killed. Okay. So they want it. I think that they're seeing the gravity of the humanitarian crisis and saying we want plausible deniability. We want to be able to say the United States asked for measure and caution and restraint, and it was not our fault as a country that Israel did not, in fact.
Yeah, I think that's a bad strategy, and it will not be persuasive to people, frankly, which is why we should just we should just disinvolve ourselves, as I say repeatedly as we talk about this, and we don't have any disagreement on that.
And I respect that, but I also feel like we also belong to a humanitarian community. We have used our veto power on the UN to block the international community's desire for a ceasefire. We repeatedly use our veto power on the UN to stop the UN from being able to have any real legitimate humanitarian impact at moments like these, even as Israel has literally repeatedly bombed UN staff and UN schools in Gaza.
Okay, but who pays for the humanitarian aid that does enter the country?
Many countries in the world, the U.S. being the richest country in the world, disproportionately because of our size. It's based in large part on
this is the incoherence of it, that we pay to destroy the country and then we pay to rebuild it.
Right, so...
And by we, the American taxpayers.
So for millions of Americans, hundreds of thousands that were in the streets just over the weekend, this isn't just about, are we literally funding it? It's partly that. It's part of why I think that we have a say. But it's also about, as members of significant power and standing in the international community, we should be publicly sanctioning the way the United States is now, with the President of the United States in the middle of electoral turmoil, choosing to fly all the way across the world to what has now emerged as a war zone, to throw his arms both literally and metaphorically around Bibi Netanyahu, a right-wing leader who is being reviled in his own country, who is blamed by his own countrymen for the events of October 7th, who is trying to skirt condemnation and political consequences through this unified government that he has now that's offering some veneer of protection. Someone against whom hundreds of thousands of Israelis were protesting in the street because of his right-wing Supreme Court reform efforts earlier this year. Joe Biden chose to offer support, both material and psychic, to all of what's going on there. And that is what people are objecting to, because they see this as the humanitarian crisis, not just a financial one. It's also just one other thing I want to say about the Barack Obama clip, is that one of the critiques that he got was he's clearly someone who knows better. As a younger person, he was more vocally pro-Palestinian before he was in politics. Edward Said, perhaps the most preeminent Palestinian scholar, activist, historian, was Obama's English professor at Columbia University, and he was known to attend a lot of pro-Palestinian events and the like. And so some people who looked at this clip were frustrated because, like many things with Obama, those of us who voted for him felt like he knew better, that this was a different kind of guy and a different kind of politician, because his record seemed to suggest as much. But it really is an illustration of how the political machinery can either change your views sincerely or make you feel so constrained that you can't say what you truly feel about things.
People voting for Barack Obama certainly thought they were going to get a less interventionist foreign policy because he ran on that explicitly. And then I think many people, not just on the left, but just all sorts of people who were dissatisfied with the neoconservatism that had come to dominate the era before him, were taken aback, frankly, by the just utter continuity of the policy.
Right, but not just being less interventionist. I will say, when Russia took Crimea in 2014, Barack Obama acted with more of a steady hand than Joe Biden proved to have behaved. So I'm not saying one-to-one. It's something about, it's more narrow than that. It's specifically on this issue of whether or not he understands the fundamental crime that's been done against the Palestinian people, who have been trying to fight for freedom for 75 years. And knowing or believing that someone truly understands the history and the politics, which frankly I think are not that complicated, and still chooses not to advocate for the end of the occupation and for the end of the apartheid treatment of Palestinians living in Israel and Gaza, is particularly demoralizing and frustrating.
All right, more Rising right after this.